Good morning, Sarah here. How you all doing? Did anybody get any sleep last night with the lunar eclipse? The moon in Pisces. I think it was at its most pronounced between 4 and 7 this morning, and I actually woke up at 5 o'clock and the light was just coming up over the hills, and I can see the sunrise from my bed. So I just opened one eye and have a look, and there was this beautiful pink line that was just expanding. It was just so lovely. And I can't see the moon obviously because it's opposite the sun on the other side of the house where I wasn't. And it was actually quite cloudy over there on behind the house. So it's just an amazing thought that, you know, the earth gets in the way of the light from the sun, in between the sun and the moon. And it's like, oh, so we cut the light out from reflecting onto the moon, which is why it goes that very dark kind of red rusty color. And it's just such a lovely mind expanding thought that, you know, these planets are moving in a way that we can actually perceive them moving by us kind of moving in between the sun and the moon. And that thought was going round and round my head at 5 o'clock this morning, just thinking how lucky we are to be on this amazing planet, this nurturing, nature filled planet, this nursery of life and growth. I mean, you know, we know of no other planets, certainly in our solar system, that is able to sustain life quite like we can. And, you know, what goes on in the outer universe, we've absolutely no idea. And I'm sure there are others, but it just seems to me that it's a bit like Goldilocks's bowls of porridge, you know, we're not too hot, we're not too cold, we're just right to hold all this life and all this growth. It's just mind-blowing, I think. And it kind of puts into perspective all this stuff that's going on, you know, within human society at the moment, which is just kind of mind-boggling. It just, if everybody just sat down and comprehended that thought of what this planet actually is and what it holds, we'd probably be in a better place. First, get rid of all that lot that think they can rule us. But that's a whole nother story. So going back to the moon's eclipse, the moon in Pisces. So Pisces is all about water, and the moon and Pisces are about the unseen. So it's really a time of reflection about mostly relationships at this point, you know, whether it's work colleagues or family or, you know, loved ones, partners, or people that we don't get on with, or people that we have karmic relationships with. And, you know, water is about flushing out and cleansing. And so we need to kind of look at how we work with all of our relationships. And it got me thinking about, you know, how as humans we have these fixed ideas in our heads about how relationships should look, and whether that's a, you know, a personal partnership or, you know, just wider relationships with people. And I think we need to, all of us, kind of just sit down and think, you know, we've been so stereotyped in the way that relationships should look, that there's no room for fluidity or fluidity and growth, really. You know, we're brought up to find a nice partner, settle down, have children, you know, get married, somewhere in all of that. You know, my grandmother always used to say to me, when are you getting married? like it was the most important thing for a woman to do. And I guess for her generation it was, you know, if if you were an unmarried woman, then, you know, life would look very different to everybody else's. You know, you might have to struggle a little bit, whatever. Or you couldn't have children, you know, whereas today people are happy having children outside of marriage. And there's nothing wrong with that if you have a supporting partner. I'm not saying there is. And so, you know, how do our, you know, close partnerships work if they're not in that kind of wedded bliss, as it were? You know, can you have a close relationship with somebody that you don't live in the same house as, or even the same country in my situation? And not to hold on to perhaps a preconceived idea that it should look a certain way, or we should be moving towards a certain way of being together, or yeah, just allowing ourselves to go with the flow, and allowing ourselves to think outside the box, I guess. I mean, I think, you know, our children, my children, you know, who are in their 30s, certainly have a different perspective on how relationships should look. As a woman, you know, I long for grandchildren. It seems to me that my kids are not in any great hurry to have children, and that's fine, that's their path. But, you know, but maybe, you know, maybe that's not their path, and maybe that's not my path in this lifetime. So, you know, we find other ways to amuse ourselves. Get another dog. My neighbour's dog has just had puppies. They're Jack Russells, and they're just so sweet. And I think, oh, I'd love to have another puppy. You know, for Rafi, he would enjoy the company, I think. And, you know, anyway, it's another tie, isn't it? It's another tie that stops me moving easily around the place. Anyway, going back to our relationships and the flow of this water, there may be things that are hidden. You know, the moon doesn't show everything because it's in the dark. It has a very narrow perspective of the light. A full moon is a much wider light spectrum, but, you know, as the moon wanes and goes through to its dark phase, you know, the path of light is much more focused, if you like. So there are areas where you can't see what's going on, and a bit like the moon card in the tarot, it's saying there are things that are hidden, there are things that are unseen. So, you know, maybe in our relationships there are things that we can't see, there are things that are not being shown to us right now. And this eclipse is highlighting that, you know, as the sun's light, it was blocked from the full moon, so that what would normally have been a very bright night was reduced to you know, a much darker night for that period of time. So it's just illuminating the fact that we can't always see what's behind somebody else, maybe, or what's behind a situation, and that we shouldn't jump to conclusions, maybe, or we need to allow for the light to shine on a situation. And the water element of Pisces, Pisces being two fish that are swimming in opposite directions, but they're in water, so that they are flowing, so that they're easily moving. So if something perhaps in a relationship is feeling as if it's pulling apart, then maybe we just go with the flow. Maybe we just allow things to flow in the direction that they're meant to be going in, whatever that is. And maybe we can't see what the future holds. Maybe we can't see what happens tomorrow, but maybe that doesn't matter. So it's all about not being too rigid in the way we perceive our lives, perceive our relationships, and maybe we just allow things to flow. Anyway, those were my thoughts this morning as I sat inside my pyramid. Sorry, I should have said that. You think I'm sitting in some sort of plumbing, copper piping. But I was just sitting in my pyramid this morning and just contemplating those thoughts that, you know, this is a real time for ending speculation, or it's a time for ending a need to see where we're going. Maybe it's it's time to end some relationships, you know, some that you've been thinking about perhaps for a long time, that it's not working, that you're pulling in opposite directions like the fish and it's not working. So maybe you have to allow the water to flow and to part. Maybe there's some karmic relationships that are coming up for endings. And what I mean by karmic relationships is people that have come into our lives that have had a profound effect on us. For example, a partnership, you know, that never worked or isn't working, but you've stayed there because that's what society says you should do, or that you've stayed there because it's easier, or you've stayed there because you've got young children, or because I don't know, financially it would be difficult for you. But that karmic relationship has probably given you the opportunity to grow in some way, whether it's through finding your own path in the meantime, having the space to be able to find your own path, so now that you could move on, or maybe it's through friction and conflict, it's highlighted some things about yourself that you're now able to deal with or to accept. Or it could be a karmic relationship with a parent that has finally come to a point where you're able to see maybe conflicts, or the loss of a parent has now come to its fulfillment, if you like, that we can let that go, that the wisdom that we have gained from that particular relationship can now be put to bed and allowed to flow away. And karmic relationships have a profound effect on our lives. You know, they often push us into situations that we normally wouldn't have done, or gone down, or explored, or just pushed us into a different way of being. That now that karmic relationship has served its purpose and served the push that you needed to start a new way of being, that has come to an end. So at this eclipse of the moon, we can allow that to flow away now in the wateriness of the moon. So I invite you to drink plenty of water today, because that will help flush everything out. Like I was saying yesterday, you know, that's part of the big cycle, is that the water is flushing our eyes out with tears. It's flushing our blood. It's allowing, you know, it's the movement of our blood. It's the cleansing of toxins from our bodies in all forms. It's hydrating our skin. It's, yeah, it's everything. You know, we're 80% something, 86% water, or what have you. So today, particularly, drink plenty of water. Maybe put a pinch of salt in it to help with the rehydration. And yeah, just be thoughtful today about watery relationships and kind of how that might affect you. And you know, please do leave a comment if you have something to say on this, because, you know, I like to start these conversations. It's good for everybody. Okay, well, have a lovely day. Enjoy this eclipse. I'm off to take Rafi to see some friends today, and maybe go up to Clywedog, which the water has almost disappeared out of that huge reservoir. It's something like 12 miles long, and they've been letting the water out to, I think it goes to the Midlands. Why it can't stay in Wales, I don't know. But you know, with lack of rainfall for the last 6 to 8 weeks, it needs some filling up. So we thought we'd go up and have a look at that. So have a good day. I'll see you all again soon. Ciao for now.